In the heart of Baltimore, where row houses line the streets and history breathes through each corner, a story unfolded that would shake the city to its core. It began not with a bang, but with a whisper. A woman in rags, head bowed beneath a tangled mass of hair, coat wrapped tightly around her thin frame like armor against the world. She sat silently in the courtroom, fingers gripping the worn fabric, a picture of defeat, of invisibility. The police officers standing along the back wall didn't just laugh at her. They tore her dignity apart with their words. One leaned toward another, smirking. "Look what the streets dragged in. Probably doesn't even know what a toothbrush is." Another officer chuckled. "She's gonna ask the judge for a sandwich instead of a lawyer." They weren't whispering. They wanted her to hear. And she did. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She sat motionless, letting their contempt wash over her like acid on steel. But what no one in that courtroom knew, not the smirking officers, not the disinterested public defender, not even the judge half listening as he shuffled paperwork, was that this woman was not who they thought she was. And this case was not what they thought it was. Her name was Danielle Carter. A black woman born and raised in the streets of West Baltimore, daughter of Clarice Carter, who worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, and sister to Malik Carter, a man whose life was shattered by the same justice system that claimed to protect him. Years earlier, Malik had been beaten unconscious by police officers after being stopped without cause. The city had called it an unfortunate misunderstanding. Danielle had called it the moment she found her purpose. She wasn't a vagrant. She wasn't homeless. Danielle Carter was an FBI agent, one of the best in her division, specializing in internal corruption and civil rights investigations. And she was here by choice. Months before that day in court, Danielle had uncovered a pattern of abuse buried inside the Baltimore Police Department, a precinct with a history of complaints that had mysteriously disappeared, body cam footage that never saw the light of day, and officers whose names kept surfacing in allegations of brutality. Complaints dismissed, witnesses silenced, reports lost. Justice swallowed whole by the system meant to uphold it. Danielle had brought the evidence to her superiors, but the case needed more. The abuses were buried so deep that they couldn't be exposed by paperwork alone. They needed a witness, a first-hand account so undeniable that the system couldn't turn away. So Danielle became that witness. She took a leave of absence. She disappeared from her life. She let herself become invisible. Layer by layer, she built the disguise: torn clothes, matted hair, dirt under her nails, the smell of the streets soaked into her skin. She learned to walk like someone who had nowhere to go. She learned to sit like someone who had nothing left. And she waited. It didn't take long. One night, resting near a grocery store dumpster, 2 patrol cars rolled up. The call had been an anonymous report of a suspicious black woman loitering near the store's back entrance. Officers swarmed her, barking commands before she could speak. Hands yanked her to her feet. A knee pressed into her back. A laugh. "Should have stayed in the trash where you belong." No Miranda rights. No questions. Just rough hands and a ride in the back of a patrol car. The charges were thin trespassing, resisting arrest, but they didn't care. To them, she was already guilty. She was processed without a phone call, without counsel. No one asked if she was hurt. No one thought she mattered. But every moment was being recorded. The insults. The threats. The laughter. The abuse. All of it captured by a micro-camera sewn into the seams of her coat and a transmitter feeding live footage to a van parked 2 blocks away, where federal agents sat watching, cataloging every word. Danielle sat in that courtroom like so many before her, silent, discarded, dismissed. But this time, the system had picked the wrong woman to ignore. Day after day, she returned to the courtroom. Each hearing added weight to the file. She was building a case not against a single officer, but against a culture of corruption that had festered unchecked. She documented every snide comment, every joke at her expense, every violation of procedure. And behind the scenes, her team gathered the evidence that connected those courtroom players to a history of brutality: Officer Daniels, Officer Meeks, names that appeared again and again in abuse complaints. They had no idea the trap they'd walked into. No idea that the woman they mocked was the sword of their own undoing. On the final day of her staged arraignment, the courtroom filled as usual with the usual faces. Danielle sat in her rags, head low, playing the role to perfection. The judge barely looked at her. The public defender didn't bother making eye contact. But when the judge asked, "Do you understand the charges against you?" Danielle didn't answer. Instead, she stood. Slow. Deliberate. She turned not to the judge, but to the gallery, to the officers standing along the back wall, arms crossed, smirk still fresh. The courtroom door opened. 2 men in dark suits entered. Calm. Confident. They didn't need to announce who they were. Their presence spoke for them. Federal agents. "Your Honor," one of them said, "we're here in reference to this case. The defendant is not who you believe she is." Danielle removed her coat. Underneath, a clean black blouse. She reached into the lining and pulled out her badge. Special Agent Danielle Carter, FBI? Silence. The room froze. Faces drained of color. The smirks faded like smoke. "I have spent the last 2 months embedded on the streets of Baltimore as part of a federal investigation into systemic abuse and misconduct within this department," she continued. "And what I have witnessed is nothing short of criminal." She turned to the officers at the back, eyes locked on Daniels and Meeks. "I'm not here to plead guilty. I'm here to hold you accountable." The federal agents stepped forward, placing a thick file on the clerk's desk. "We're moving to dismiss all charges against Special Agent Carter and submit evidence into the record implicating Officers Daniels, Meeks, and several others in abuse of power, civil rights violations, and obstruction of justice." The judge sat speechless. The courtroom murmured with rising tension. Daniel sputtered, "She's lying. This is entrapment." Danielle didn't flinch. "The only trap was the one you walked into yourself. All I did was give you the space to show who you really are." In the days that followed, the story spread like wildfire. News outlets ran the footage captured by Danielle's hidden camera. Baltimore watched as the city's protectors laughed about beating citizens, joked about spraying people with hoses, threatened to break ribs for noncompliance. The truth was undeniable. The Department of Justice launched a full investigation. Officers were suspended. Cases were reopened. Lawsuits poured in. Protests filled the streets. But Danielle knew this wasn't the end. She knew justice wasn't a single courtroom victory. It was a battle fought every day, in every quiet corner where abuse hides. She faced backlash from within her own agency. Some colleagues called her a traitor. Others called her a hero. She stood firm, knowing she had done what needed to be done. When asked by a reporter if she would do it again, Danielle's answer was simple. Yes, 100 times over. Because silence never stops injustice. Only action does. The streets of Baltimore were different after that. Not healed, but awake. The system couldn't pretend not to see anymore. And Danielle Carter, the woman they once laughed at in court, had made sure of it.